right, we are live. All right, good morning, everyone. Coming to you live from the Climate headquarters here in St. Louis, Missouri. Got our illustrious guest, Tom Eickhoff, with me here, and I will let Tom introduce himself in a minute. I got a good group with me this morning, lots of helpers. I was teasing Tom. I get a rock star guest on Ask the Agronomist, and all of a sudden I got all kinds of people that want to come to the live broadcast. So we've almost got a studio audience here with Adam, Jennifer, and Dan helping out. So please chat in your questions. I got plenty of helpers here to field the questions. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. We're getting an early start this morning. Tom's a busy man. He's got an important meeting that starts at 8 o'clock. And so we're going to get this knocked out before he has to go to his meeting. And so hopefully the time change. You're all early risers as well. So no big deal for the farm community out there. But so anyway, Tom, thank you for joining us, and I'll let you introduce yourself, and we'll get started.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking me to join, Lance. And I you could say it was because they thought it was an important guest. I think it's probably because they want to see if this how this thing goes, and they got a live audience to give us an evaluation when we're done. That's probably a more likely story. But hey, thanks for allowing me to join the session this morning. So as Lance said, my name is Tom Eickhoff. I've been with this company for just over 16 years. Actually, probably the first year I met you.
Yeah, congratulations. Yeah. I just had my 30th anniversary, so I got a 15-year head start on you.
Well, that's an outstanding career. I wouldn't expect anything else, Lance. But no, it's been a really exciting ride for me. Coming from a very small town family farm in northeast Nebraska, my brothers still run through about 5 or 6 different roles and responsibilities while with the company, and now with Climate and taking part in how digital is really changing and transforming ag. I couldn't be more excited for what the future of agriculture holds, as well as just the opportunities that I've been given with the company, and working with great people like yourself, and seeing how technology is really shifting the way we manage agriculture.
Yeah. Now you came from a huge family, right? I didn't know that about you until I read something Jennifer posted. So I can see why you maybe had to do something other than farm for a living.
I did, yeah. So I've got 10 siblings. So yeah, it was a fun way to grow up. I'll say that, especially
where were you in the hierarchy?
Yeah, I'm number 10.
Okay.
Number 10 out of the 11. So I've got one younger brother, 5 sisters, 5 brothers. So we keep each other honest. There's a lot of BS that happens in the house, but everyone's willing to call you out on it. So you don't get away with much. No, but you're exactly right. The 2 brothers next in line above me are the 2 that are operating our farm. So, it was pretty clear that, farming probably wasn't in the cards. So I looked at, going to school, went to the University of Nebraska and studied agronomy, and it's been a great run ever since. And I always laugh. I actually reflect on this quite often when I look at the changes that have happened on our family farm. From when I was growing up to the way that my brothers manage it. There's really big shifts that have happened. Technology has obviously played a huge role in that, but I often think of Dad had 6 boys to keep out of trouble. He probably needed lots of busy hands. So I think, labor was not really a huge challenge for him. So the way I think, he made decisions where it was, how do I keep all these boys busy? Whereas when my brothers took over and Dad took a step back, it was 2 of them running the farm, and they didn't have that. So things like Roundup Ready technology and the way biotech transformed the way we managed our farm, from weed control to insect control. It's night and day different. And you look back now at the production level and the way the farm is operating, and you can see the difference.
Right. Well, you just think about that, and you go back in the history of farming. Yeah, there used to be, families were huge, and you had all this family labor, and today, labor shortages and issues and finding people to do the work is one of the, you talk to farmers, that's one of the biggest challenges they have today, is finding decent people that are willing to do the work, even though the work isn't, as in some cases, as hard as it used to be. It's still a struggle.
Yeah. Well, I give a presentation once in a while, a little bit of history on our farm, and just as an introductory, folks who maybe aren't familiar with agriculture, And, if you look at from when I graduated high school to where my brothers are today, it went from a farm that had 5 or 6 people working on it every day to now 2 people working on it. They've more than doubled in the number of acres they farm. They've more than doubled the number of cattle they raise, and you have much less than half the labor. So it's to your point, you have to find efficiency in other places, and it's a different world than it was 20, 25 years ago.
Okay, well, let's we'll kind of dive into this here. So kind of explain to us, you're the climate science lead, I think, right? And we'll get into the whole what's the difference between climate and DFS in a minute. Our viewers might not care about that, but I'm personally kind of curious about that. So what do you do in your role today with climate?
Yeah, so it's a really exciting role. So I lead what's called our science organization within climate, and if I sum it up in maybe a sentence, what we're accountable for is to build out agronomic models that are ultimately going to help or assist farmers in making better decisions on their farm. And so what does that really mean? Well, there's a couple of key assumptions that we have. Is one, that if we have data and information, we can actually use data science to improve decision making. And one of the things we as a company have a lot of is data.
Right.
So I often think of when we bring a new hybrid out to market or a new crop protection tool to whether it's herbicide, fungicide, it might be new to the market. But for us, we've been working on it 8, 9, sometimes 10 years and doing field tests. So we actually know quite a lot about those products, and we've amassed data over many years, lots of different environments. We start to see, how this thing's going to respond in various ways. So when we look at how do we leverage that data better, what my team is doing is they're looking through that vast amounts of our R&D data, even the data that you guys are all developing through your market development trials, and saying, hey, can we actually apply computer science or agronomic models to this information and improve the on-farm decision-making process? Doesn't mean to replace, but it's certainly one other way you can use data and information to make better decisions that on products maybe you don't have that much familiarity with, or that you're a little bit unsure, hey, is this a good decision or not? And that's really what my team is working on. And we've got projects going on, obviously in North America, it's our most established market, but also in Latin America as well as Europe, building out various data science capabilities to really help in that decision-making process.
I mean, a lot of that effort to this point has gone into hybrid placement, hybrid positioning, scripting, things like that. We had a nitrogen tool at one point in time. Nitrogen proved to be difficult.
It is.
A lot of this stuff is difficult. I guess is there anything on the near term horizon that you think would be a new area that we would be getting into with modeling and other things?
Yeah, there's a number of new places that we're exploring. Obviously seed placement, there's been some huge improvements in how we're approaching that type of information. We're actually doing a lot of work on disease, both in corn and soybeans, and some diseases that obviously would be important for this market, things like white mold in soybeans, gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight in corn. They're
There's something called tar spot. People talk
tar spot as well. Yep, we're starting to work on that one as well. But as you know, to have a good model, you actually have to have data. So these last couple of years have been actually pretty good at giving us data.
That's right. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, and we've had our colleague Jim Donnelly on with me before, and Jim has been recognized within the company as helping to develop an assay for that. So that's something that we're very excited about, having the ability to, because this frustrates farmers. You might be surprised that it's difficult to get what we call good data on tar spot. You think every field's full of tar spot, but there's not necessarily always a ratable amount of tar spot, and getting it to happen when you want it to happen uniformly and reliably is a requirement to collect good data on hybrid differences. And we have developed some ways to do that we're excited about. And I think that will enable us to have data we can use to make decisions and improve our management.
Yeah, no question, Lance. I mean, and so, you've got some of these, I'd say, very agronomically relevant topics that we're continuing to work on, trying to answer some of those key key decisions. Should I spray a fungicide? Which hybrid should I place in what field? What soybean variety should I place? We're doing work in soy. But then there's some new areas as well. And you've probably seen some work around carbon. And while we're not necessarily building out carbon models, there's obviously portions of how you would go to market and want to simplify these programs for customers that can leverage data science, using geospatial information to help verify some of the practices that farmers are implementing that are going to then translate to value downstream in the marketplace. Probably maybe some viewers last week saw a big announcement coming out of the World Agritech Conference around our partnership with Microsoft. We talk often about the accessibility of digital tools for agriculture. Really what this partnership with Microsoft is all about is how do we make some of these capabilities more accessible. We obviously have a tremendous amount of experience in agriculture. Folks like Microsoft really know how to do, a lot of the engineering and data connections between many partners out in the marketplace. So bringing those two things together really provides an opportunity for many more folks within agriculture to be able to have the capabilities within their digital tools.
So Tom, Lance, that's a great segue there that you just brought up, talking about us working with Microsoft, because our old buddy Merle had a question.
We've got some audience members, and Merle will be one of them that are Mr. Reliable when it comes to asking questions on Ask the Agronomist.
Good question.
So yeah,
what it's kind of like, Lance, is when we're at an internal meeting, we can rely on you.
There you go. That's right.
Merle's the Lance. That's right.
Yeah.
So Merle has a great question. We talk a lot about all the different modeling that we do with the data within the company and climate, and he would like to know if you could compare and contrast the modeling that we do with a lot of the artificial intelligence that's being, implemented in different markets and different places outside of ag.
Yeah, great question, Merle.
It's a great question.
Great question. Yeah, so I think, Merle, maybe to break this down pretty simply is, it's one thing to have data, and then there's, when we talk about modeling, there's just a number of different, I'd just say, tools or ways that you can approach, applying a data science model. There's things like just our basic statistical methods that we've used historically. There's tools like machine learning, where you're really having the model go through the data and it's teaching itself, learning based upon the information there. You've got artificial intelligence that is a kind of a whole new space of how do you apply data science to large data sets. So really what we're trying to do is, one, we're trying to figure out what is the best tool for the job we're trying to do today. When you look at things like artificial intelligence, it's obviously one of the areas that is moving really fast. It's getting a ton of attention in the marketplace today because of things like ChatGPT, a lot of these new tools that are now becoming more established and more open. So one of the key terms you hear often in data science communities is is it an open source data? So essentially, if you have a data set, you can take this model and apply it to that data set and then start to leverage that tool out there. So that's really one of the things that's happening within this AI space is you're starting to see folks like Microsoft and many of these startup companies and just various players in the marketplace that are now having these types of AI models that are out there and available for public use. So it's a really exciting place. It's one of the next kind of layers that you need to have. But as I think maybe, Lance, as we get into our conversation today, one of the things that as a farmer, we should always be thinking about is if you want to use these types of capabilities, if you want them to work well for you, guess what it means? You got to have data.
Right.
And you got to have information that's relevant to the types of things that you're trying to decide.
Right. And you may need to be willing to share that data as well in ways that, maybe in the past you were uncomfortable with.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, it's important to think about that when we talk about many of these tools that are out there today. My kids are one that will get on the ChatGPT and see how they might want to write an essay for school or what they can learn about a school project by asking this tool, which is great. they should use those tools, but I often got to remind them of remember where it's getting its information. So just because it comes up with an answer doesn't mean that you use the right information to find that answer. And so that the accuracy of those things is always something to be thinking about.
Yes.
So Tom, Lance, I get this question and have this conversation. I know you guys probably do too with farmers and, concerned about data privacy, concerned about what we're doing with the data. And could you try and highlight what an individual farming operation means to us in a data set or not when it comes to trying to make better models and using the data to make better decisions?
Yeah. So, I think our data privacy policy is from my view, super clear. The data is the farmers at all times. And if at any point in time they want to exclude or remove that data set from our use, they can do that. It's as simple as going onto the website and making the request. And within, hours, if not days, it'll be pulled out of the system. So I think, that's just number one. The most important thing farmers need to remember is they still have that level of control of how their information is being used. Now, with that said, I think, you kind of mentioned, Lance, if you want to get full value out of some of the tools that are being built, the expertise, the models, all of those other things, there's an element of, hey, are you willing to share that information with your trusted advisor, with your dealer, with your agronomist? So if that's okay, then all of a sudden you've got this whole host of people around you who are helping you utilize that information in a much, I'd say, more productive way, and changing it not only from data to actually insights that you can use to make better decisions on the farm. And I just think that's a critical thing, because when we do that, now all of a sudden we're not just relying on data that we've generated. We're combining that with information that's relevant to your own farm, your own operation, which is only going to make a recommendation that much stronger and that much more relevant and that much more applicable to what you're doing on your own farm.
I comment a little bit on, the limitations we have of, how much we can learn from that, that we'll call it metadata, I guess, the big picture data, because really all we know about that is, geospatially, we know where it came from. We know what the yield was. We might know what was planted there, but that's about it. As far as how it was managed and that stuff, we don't know as much about that as we do our own research data. And, how does that limit what we can learn from that?
Yeah, it's a great point, Lance. Again, let's just compare and contrast our own research trials internally versus what might be available in something like FieldView. And as a researcher out in the field, you're going to collect every piece of information. You're going to collect fertility, all the applications that are made for different pesticides. You may even have weather stations, right there at the location. You may be going through weekly and collecting notes on different plant observations, whether it's disease development or, weed growth, whatever. And you contrast that with what we have in digital tools. And again, I'd say this is kind of leading up to that comment I was making earlier, Lance. It's only as good as the information that's there. So if you're interested in making these types of analysis on, hey, what impact did this fertility practice have? What impact did this crop protection practice have? And that information's not flowing in somewhere, it gets really hard to make those comparisons. And, you're absolutely right. Most folks are pretty good at entering in, accurate hybrid information or things like that.
I have a lot of acres of a hybrid called plot mix. Tom. That won't do you any good.
Yes, that's it might for a year, but I think, when you're looking back 2, 3, 4 years into your data and you're like, what was that product again? It might be a challenge. So again, I just think there's huge opportunities around the types of information, the quality of information that are getting entered into these systems. And again, if you want your data to work for you, those are important things. Right. If that's not something that's of interest to you, then you're right. You're always going to be limited in what you can do with your information.
Well, as I talk to farmers, it's the spectrum is huge, from guys that are uncomfortable sharing anything with us to growers who are frustrated that we're not doing more with their data, and comparing us to some of our competitors, which once they get the farmers' data, they own it. And that's different. It is than the way we're set up. And I get people that challenge me, well, why can't you do this? Or why can't you do that? Well, that's people that they own the data that you send to them, when you send your data to FieldView, we don't own that data.
Yep.
We have certain things we're allowed to do with
right.
it, but it's still your data, and that limits, some of the things that we can do with it.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so great conversation. Keep the good questions coming in on the chat. So let's so what is Digital Field Solutions, DFS as we call it, or is it field or farming? Damn.
Yep.
I should have made a note to
That's
myself.
all right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
You guys got more work to do to get that branding done, because I can't even remember the damn name. So what is DFS, and how does that differ from climate, or is that now climate, and should we not use the word climate anymore?
No, you should still use climate. And Digital Farming Solutions is probably a reflection of a bit of the change we've gone through over the last year. Because one thing I'd say is, hey, FieldView and climate are still like they were before. I mean, there's no change there in how we're operating, what we're thinking about. What Digital Farming Solutions, you'll see that term brought up more frequently than maybe it has in the past, is what we've tried to do is expand the number of things we can work on. So it's not just climate and FieldView anymore. It's also a broader set of solutions that we're partnering with and working within Bayer to help bring to the marketplace. And when you think about elements like carbon and some of the work going on there, you may have heard a term called new business models, or things where we want to think about how can we go to market differently and actually share in some of the risk around recommendations that we're making with the customer. It's broader than what it historically was. So Digital Farming Solutions really help us encompass a bit broader thinking than maybe what we've had in this digital space previously.
And I guess I'll ask you your perspective as as a not only a Bayer employee but also a farmer. There's a lot of things that we could do differently than we have historically. With that change comes, uncomfortableness and complexity. We launched our pilot on, outcome-based pricing and seed several years ago, and, haven't necessarily, given up on that, being a better way someday, but a lot of complexity in that. And I guess speak to, as a farmer, what should we expect? What should we be prepared for? How much could this change going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Lance, it boils down to a couple of things. And one, let's start with, I think digital tools, things like FieldView, have made things in the marketplace much more transparent than they ever have been. I mean, how often do you get calls, or you guys all get calls, where someone's still going across the field and they already have a pretty good idea of what performance is looking like? So that level of instant feedback and transparency on product performance is just almost ubiquitous in the marketplace.
I can still count on one hand in 30 years, Tom, how many times somebody's called to tell me something was really good. so yeah, they are paying attention.
They pay attention. So what has that allowed? It's allowed all this data to be generated. We talked a little bit about how data science might help contribute to that. So now you start to build out this new tool set of, hey, we can make better recommendations, but yet there's still a little bit of reluctance on, hey, you're asking me to do something very, very different than what I've done before. And the one thing I've always heard consistently is, hey, that's great for you to tell me to try this new hybrid, go do this thing, but I'm the one footing the bill. So if it goes wrong.
Right. Yeah, the term, I don't want you doing your research on my farm.
You're right, exactly. Yeah. So, I think these are, when I think about the way digital is changing agriculture, that's one way of, you've got this transparency, we've got these tools. How do you start to use them in a way that helps to advance productivity or sustainability on the farm faster than it was before? The other thing, I think that we're really taking a hard look at, and many of what these pilots and things that you guys are maybe starting to explore in your own marketplaces is, I just look at our own household and the number of times the Amazon truck pulls up to the house, how many online orders there are a day. Consumers are just transacting differently than they were before. And it's almost becoming an expectation that you've at least got some level of digital, in the way that you do business. And as we think about that, you don't want to go create 15 different ways to do that across a business. You really want to start to explore what is the best customer focused way, customer centric way to build out a digital experience. And when you kind of pull all those dynamics together, Lance, I mean, those are really the big things that are driving, hey, how should we look and how should we work with our customers going forward? So a lot to be defined, I think, in the coming years on exactly how this takes shape in the marketplace. I think what's really cool about some of these efforts is we're actually learning right there with our customers. And, whenever you're learning right with your customers, you're probably developing a much more relevant solution.
Right. Well, and we've kind of learned the hard way that, when you're learning with your customer, sometimes it's not a real impressive experience for the customer, and setting that right expectation is pretty important. We'd like to show off to you guys, a lot of times, of how well our stuff works. And when you're figuring that out and developing it, it's, you're kind of seeing how the sausage is made. And sometimes that gets uncomfortable. So we've had a lot of learnings around that in recent years. So we talked a lot about modeling and the challenges of that and the opportunities of that. Comment, if you would, one thing that's, I think, kind of been to me a challenge for that is we can model what we know based on what has happened. We still don't know what's going to happen. And when what happens diverges from what has happened in the past, the ability of that model to predict that is limited, I guess. So
for sure,
speak to that.
Yeah. So I mean, again, let's maybe just break down the approach a little bit, Lance. And I think, again, this is where things become really powerful, but also important for folks to understand is when you're building out these sort of predictive models, let's face it, the model is only going to be as smart as the data that you train it on. And if you train something on 2 years worth of data, you probably have a really good prediction on what those 2 years would have looked like. And it's why I think I commented earlier on, many times these products are not new to us and you've got many years worth of information. Those become really important data sets to be able to understand, over a broad set of time, how did things perform? What did you see? What did it look like in various scenarios that then help to improve the overall performance of those? So I think, when we talk about our own products and the elements that we can control and the data sets we have, we can get pretty good there. Now, the second step of that is exactly what you said. Well, now, but what's going to happen next year? And, really what I think that boils down to is, what does Mother Nature have in store?
Right.
And have we seen that before? And can we really understand it? And, one of the things that we've done pretty extensively in all of our efforts is we do actually have a weather science team that sits within our science organization and is working side by side with our crop modeling teams that are focused on things like seed placement and disease management, and consistently working towards how can I improve that overall prediction by increasing or improving our forecast. That helps us, hey, we all know that weather forecasts aren't perfect, but there are things that we can do as we apply that type of forecasting in with our historic data sets that start to improve that, that concept. And again, when we do this, we oftentimes, one of the cool things about modeling is you can look at all this data in the past and you can teach a model, and then you can actually remove a year out of there and say, hey, now I'm just going to take that data out like the model doesn't know it existed, and see if I use data up to that point to predict, what would have it told me to do? And then you put that data back in and say, well, was the model right? Did it actually do what it said it do? So these are some steps we can take that really increase kind of the level of confidence we have, and that we can be more accurate. And I think the other part is, Lance, is it's never going to be perfect. None of these things are 100%. But the question we really need to ask is, are we better off than we were before? And I think that's a key thing, kind of your point about a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes that can be a little bit of an uncomfortable thing to look at.
Right. Well, and it's all about the expectation that you create, and also the level of understanding of how inaccurate normal was. I sometimes think that people give us more credit than they should for knowing how products are going to perform in certain situations. And if we used to be right 60% of the time, just pulling a number out of the air, and we can now be right 80% of the time. That's a 20% improvement.
So it's a pretty big change,
but if you thought we were always right before, that's not the case. And if you think we're always going to be right in the future, that's not the case either. We're just trying to get better at making those predictions.
Yeah. And Lance, it's one thing too, when I'm repeating the same thing I've always done before, and I'm just trying to improve upon it. And then there's other elements like, hey, I want to actually implement a whole new practice, something I've never done before. And, how can you leverage these tools to help accelerate that learning curve?
Right.
I think those are probably two different scenarios we're going to have to ask ourselves as we're looking at how does data science really change our thinking?
Well, and I think too, corn breeders have worked really hard, and a lot of money has been spent for decades to develop hybrids that perform at a high level consistently across a lot of different environments. And so we've worked hard to develop what I call broadly adapted hybrids. Well, now we've maybe got the ability to position things better, where you could make a lesser broadly adapted product that's maybe perfect for this situation. Maybe you could utilize that stuff more than we could in the past.
Absolutely.
And so, do we breed corn differently because we now identify this environment and we want to create something that's adapted to that environment, and we can manage it and position it in that environment. So it doesn't get put in the wrong spot. And then you can utilize stuff that maybe 20 years ago, you would have thrown that hybrid away because it only fit on some niche acres that you couldn't guarantee it was going to end up in the place it needed to.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a very realistic scenario that you just painted. And, I think often, Lance, we talked about it. It started in 2007. I think that was, if I remember right, that was the year we had Farm Progress Show in Decatur, and I think we had the seed chipper on display. It was like the first time we put that out there, and you start to, again, look at, well, what did that lead to? That led to a huge amount of genomic data that our breeding organization could then leverage in their decision making throughout their advancement processes and breeding processes. And now you look at, what can your data on your own farm do for you? You think about it just like that as an asset. Now all of a sudden you're opening yourself up to be able to leverage this information and make a whole different set of decisions than you were ever before.
So
go ahead, Ed.
So I get a lot of questions from farmers that are really wanting to get as much data as they can into the system, like you said, and you guys were discussing earlier, that we're really good at getting harvest yield information and planting data collected and in there. We're getting better at sprayer, tillage, and these other things. What's Climate FieldView doing to try and make the collection process of agronomic management factors even easier to get into that data set?
Yeah, that's a great question. There continues to be a huge amount of improvements on kind of the connectivity to various equipment. So I think if you go onto the website, you'll see all the different equipment providers that we're compatible with. I think it's one of the huge benefits, in my view, of what FieldView does. Is it's brand agnostic. You plug it in, and you're starting to collect that information, whether it's a sprayer, whether it's a fertilizer application, whether you're making a tillage, a tillage pass. All of those pieces of information can be collected within FieldView. Now, do many folks know how to do it? Maybe not. And, I think that's where, again, there's a huge opportunity to work with folks like you, Lance, and all the field sales reps. There's a whole customer support team that's on call here to help people use those tools to their fullest extent. One of the cool things I saw this year is one of the most used parts of FieldView is the yield region report, where folks can go in, and define what part of the field that they want to run that analysis. Well, there's some new functionality coming in that allows us to do that by application type as well. So expanding beyond just a harvest report to now, hey, I want to do this, but I want to do it by various application types. That's a huge opportunity to now start looking at what are all the other practices that you may have. But again,
well, and to make that work, you've got to map those applications.
Yes. That's correct.
And the thing I challenge people with is you may not see a tremendous amount of value today in taking the time to map all that stuff, but you don't really know how you're going to want to be using that 5 years from now. And
Right.
if you don't start collecting it today, you can't use it 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And so I think there has to be a little bit of faith that, okay, I see the potential value in generating data. And then the question becomes is how much data am I going to be willing to generate? And that'll be different for everybody.
Yeah.
But to Adam's point, the easier we can make it to generate it, the more people are going to be willing to do it.
Right. And I think what you'll see is continued focus on that compatibility. There's more and more work going on to allow data to move more easily across platforms. Things like we call them APIs, so just data connectivity, so that if I have my data in one platform, how can I quickly and easily move it into FieldView? You're seeing a lot of improvements there as well. So generally when I look at the space, I see a tremendous amount of partnership and collaboration happening across the providers out there to make the farmer's ability to move data where they feel like they need it to be much more easily. Doesn't mean there's not improvement that can be made, but I think there's a general recognition that, hey, if we really want to make this digital space work, the kind of foundational expectation you should have is you can move your data around pretty easily. Right. And one of the things that I think we do really well at FieldView is allow that to happen.
Well, you brought up collaboration and other people in the industry. Obviously, I think FieldView kind of set the bar for a digital platform, and there's competitors out there and other people that have invested and worked hard and had good ideas and have elevated their game to where sometimes guys will argue, well, if you're a John Deere guy, for example, and you got Operations Center, Operations Center can do a lot of things for a farmer too, and he might see it as extra unnecessary work to get the data into FieldView. So I guess talk a little bit about, where you see I know it's easy, but where's the additional value for the grower of taking that step? He's already generating it, in his platform to get it into ours.
Yeah. No, I think this is a really important topic, and you're right. I think the improvements that have been made to allow the data movement has been really good. And, if folks need to move their data or desire to move their data from JDOC to FieldView, for example, or vice versa, we can help with that. I mean, that's something we can absolutely do. But when you talk about, so what's different, to me, in my mind, a few things, pop up, Lance, and I'd maybe start with, there's a good group of folks sitting in this room that to me are probably the number one differentiator. We've got a huge support system around FieldView, from agronomists or field sales reps to our activation managers out in the marketplace that, essentially are free. Pick up the phone, talk to them, talk to our customer success folks. And, when I think about, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm sitting next to an absolute product expert for DeKalb and Asgrow that knows seed and crop protection. How can that, don't sell yourself short, 30 years experience.
They just haven't caught on to me yet.
But I think about, your knowledge of our seed and crop protection portfolio coupled with the knowledge of FieldView and the tools. How does a farmer tap into that? I mean, that is a huge opportunity to leverage the folks around you in a platform like FieldView that brings together the agronomics and the product knowledge of our seed and crop protection portfolio with the knowledge of their farm. And that, in my mind, that's number one. I mean, man, you've got these folks that are familiar with the tool. You can share data easily. You can start to look at it and give them insights. That's a big one. When I've had the chance to meet with customers, I think, what they will tell me oftentimes is the scripting tools that are available in FieldView are really, really good and very simple to use. Yeah. And again, this comes back to, if your data is in one place and I want to move it over here so I can use this set of tools, that's something that's pretty easy. And, if you think about how you might want to change operating on your farm, whether that's density or whether it's variable rate applications, there's a tool set within FieldView that's super easy to use and a very powerful one. And, the other thing I'd just say is, again, for individuals who may not have a fleet that's all the same color, it's where that compatibility across pieces of equipment becomes really important. And just as our earlier conversation has, maybe I've never really thought about, is my sprayer data that valuable to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I've never really thought about, I don't really need my sprayer to be compatible and pull data in. Well, maybe you should think about that a little bit and say, hey, well, actually, if I had that data, how might I operate my farm differently? What might be some different questions I would ask? What might be some different things I would look at within my own operation? So, when you start to combine that, I've got people, I've got compatibility, I've got easy to use tools. I think there's some pretty compelling reasons why it might make sense to take a look and really open up the door to say, hey, maybe there's more than just one tool out there.
Right. Well, and I think too, the reality is it's our tool. It's the one we're building to integrate with new business models and smart corn and the new products that we're developing. And if we're going to bring products to the market through FieldView, and I think we're going to, that's you're going to need to have access to that platform, and that may not be the only platform you've got. And as long as they're easy to share back and forth, having multiple platforms, while it might seem unnecessary, there's probably benefits to it. And as long as we can make it simple, you can have multiple platforms, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lance. And as I think about many of the capabilities my team is working on, the places they're going to be available first is in FieldView. So if you want those types of recommendations, again, I think it's a huge opportunity to get comfortable using it and thinking about, how do I use it beyond just that? But you're absolutely right. These new technologies and things like smart corn that are really going to, I think, kind of be the next big change in the way we think about growing corn. Some of the newest technology is going to be available in FieldView.
Well, and the thing that I think makes FieldView and smart corn fit together so well is we're going to be making probably more in-field, in-season, ground-based applications, which are a lot easier to map. And it's going to give you the opportunity to put in more data layers that who knows what insights we'll learn from those. But until you get the layer in there, you can't learn much from it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Any questions?
No.
Okay.
Jennifer and I.
She looked like she wanted to say something.
Jennifer and I were just talking. We're really excited about our Yield Chasers competition they were doing in the West Central Illinois team, and I really think that it's applicable to bring it up today in the regard that if you're trying to take things to the next level in a small way on your farming operation, or if you're really trying to go for a Yield Chasers type competition acre, I really think the capability and the leverage that you can get out of getting as much data, the timing of your spraying application, the timing of your tillage, what type of tillage, how deep did you go? The more information you've got, I think the more capable you're going to be to make better decisions based on historical information, historical outcomes that you need to be thinking about right now. You know what I mean? If you're wanting to be in a Yield Chasers competition, if you're wanting to try, there's no time better than now to be trying to think about what you're going to do, because you only get one chance every year, right? You get one growing season a year. It's not multiple times a year. It's only once a year. So I guess just putting a plug in for trying to utilize as much of the digital capabilities that we have and the capabilities to collect information, and working with your provider, whether it's your TA or FSR, to try and, what can we do different? What have we learned? What haven't we learned that's working on your farm? And man, the tools and all the different API partners that we can work with to help us answer these questions is just, it's really underestimated, I think.
When you mentioned that the field region report was the most used feature, I thought of Yield Chasers, because that's how we get our Yield Chaser entries. Is we have them do it. You can scale it and weigh it and do it, kind of the old-fashioned way if you want, but require a contiguous 10-acre field region that doesn't look like an amoeba. We do make them draw it kind of somewhat of a regular polygon, but you can search around that field for the best 10-acre block you can find, and make that your Yield Chaser yield contest entry. So one question I wanted to ask, I think something that growers would really embrace would be our ability to make in-season recommendations for something that you maybe ought to think about doing based off of our knowledge. I saw a presentation a week or so ago. There's biological products that are being tested that have the ability to maybe be a stress alleviator. And if the weather forecast says there's a stress coming, are there products you should spray on your crop to help them weather that stress? Is there potential with models, with AI, with, what we're working on to, not just build a script, but maybe alert people to something that you ought to think about doing right now?
Yeah, no question, Lance. I mean, there's tons of opportunities. And I mentioned that the team is working a lot on various disease efforts today. And that's a big portion of what they're trying to do is how can we give that type of insight weeks or maybe even months ahead of time to say, hey, this is a field you should probably go take a look at and you should really think about taking action on. I think those are absolutely realistic expectations we should have when it comes to disease management. Also, I think a lot about, things like weed management and being able to understand, hey, when is a weed going to emerge? When might it be hitting that stage where I needed to, need to make application that getting a timely application at the right size is such a,
we talk about that a lot.
Yep, I figured you probably did. How could you leverage digital tools and these types of models to help inform that? And, to your point, have that alert served right up to you. Like, hey, I woke up in the morning, I look at my field view account and it says, hey, these are the 3 things I should probably be paying attention to today. I absolutely think those are exactly what we want field view to become and the types of capabilities that we're building out within our science organization to help support it.
Cool. So let's see what else is on my notes here that we haven't talked about yet. What's something that you wish growers would do more of? We've talked about the mapping. We've talked about collecting the data. Are there other things that you think would be a big benefit if more people were willing to do?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I see, Lance, and we've chatted a bit about it, is I would love to see farmers leverage their own data further than what they do today. And again, when I look at, there's so many different analogies you can use, whether you're talking about financial planning or other things, how valuable is it when you can look back and really look at past performance to help inform what should I be doing in the future? And we have these incredibly, let's face it, these are incredibly powerful tools at collecting information. And I think what you've heard, what I've heard is farmers are like, well, yeah, but where's the value? I don't see the value in it.
Right.
And part of that is on us to make sure that we're building out the capabilities in these things to accelerate what that value can do. But I think there's also just a huge opportunity for everyone to think about, if I was building something that I viewed as an asset, how would I treat it? And, whether that's a farming operation or a portfolio of financial things, that's an asset that you manage. What would happen if everyone thought of their data as an asset and said, I'm going to put as much care and concern about thinking about what's the types of information I want to have? How would I use that then to make better decisions that's going to make my operation more valuable, more profitable, more sustainable, whatever that goal may be? And again, I think if you look at the amount of information folks could collect versus what they actually collect, it's probably pretty small.
Yeah.
And if there was one thing, it would be that thing. But there's so many other areas that I think you can explore around what are some of the new practices, what are some of the new techniques that, taking a little bit of that risk and that step into some of these new markets, carbon being one example of, how might I think differently if I was going to build myself up to participate in these types of programs? What would I need? There's huge opportunities there as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've challenged people before that, I think for the vast majority of growers, field view is a rain gauge and a yield map. And, it needs to be a lot more than a rain gauge and a yield map. And it can be. The tools are there. We build more all the time, but there's a lot more power that exists already today. And I think as technology changes, as we get, and I think your question about where's the value, I'm reminded of a question that another avid Ask the Agronomist watcher asked one time. He had 15 years of yield data, and he was really struggling to correlate it to anything that he thought would help him. But I kind of challenged his thinking a little bit on what he was trying to correlate it to, and what is truly influencing yield. And I mean, you can correlate to soil type, you can correlate to organic matter, you could correlate to fertility, you could correlate to lots of things, but what truly is driving yield? And one thing for our market, especially in Central Illinois, is drainage. And there's no tile data in field view yet. And to me, that's something that needs to be explored. Is how do we get that tile map in there? Because where those tile lines are affects a lot of things. and I've always said, if we had the tile map in there, I would change my planting script every time I'm on top of the tile line.
Sure.
Because that's the best part of the field generally.
Yeah.
And so there's just all this information that's out there that, we know is influencing yield, but how do you get it in there? How do you make it easy to use? And when you're mining that data set on your own farm, what should you be looking for? What variables are you going to try to correlate yield to? Farmers, tend to think it's population, or it's soil fertility levels, or and oftentimes it's something that you maybe wouldn't have expected is what's making that part of the field the best part of your field.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing, Lance, you probably had this experience many times where, you when you show someone the data visually, all of a sudden the light bulb comes on, like, oh, I know exactly what happened there. And I think the more of those types of conversations we can have, and again, this is where I think the people surrounding you become so important, of like, hey, if I show this to Lance, maybe you'll know something about that hybrid. So, oh, I know exactly what happened there. And I think those types of communities are really important when we start to look at operating at the scale and scope of what many of our farmers do today.
Tom, are there any new tools or features within Climate Field View that we're bringing on or that you're excited about? I mean, we talked a lot about Field Region Report and how awesome that feature is. Is there anything else new that you could share with us that's coming?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of things coming. The team's got a whole list of new product features that are coming out. There's a few that I think to me are really impactful. The as applied type of information, being able to do that analysis is just a huge one. There's been some really nice improvements in our overall scripting tools that I think folks should really be paying attention to, especially around some of the density work that we've been doing, Lance. I mean, there's more and more improvements coming in that front. There's been a lot of improvements on the ability to move data, and having that be a much simpler process. I'll be the first to admit it's not always been super easy. That one's been really, really good. The third area, which I'm forgetting right now, it'll come back to me.
Okay, yeah.
Go to the next question, and then
So could you explain a little bit more? Like when you say move data, do you mean move it from like John Deere's platform to Climate's platform to maybe another API partner just with the click of a finger, or is that what you're talking about when you say moving data?
Absolutely. Being able to easily, hey, if I'm in this platform and I really want to get my data into Field View and I want to move all of it, and I want it to move much more simply. It's not a USB stick, it's like, this is super simple click of a couple clicks to get your data moved. I think is super important. And that was the mental jog I needed to get to my third one.
I was hoping that.
The other area that the team is putting a lot of effort in is one of the things I think for many of our dealers out there, they've had trouble, thinking about how do I aggregate and really look at all of my customers, the ones that want to share data with me. And there's a lot of improvements coming on that front too. So whether you're an operation where you've got multiple people involved, or whether you're a dealer and have, a subset of customers that you want to start to be able to do this types of analysis and, comparisons and really help people's data work for them and get broader insights. The team's working on a number of features that's really going to help enable that as well. And I think that'll be, in my mind, a game changer. Because again, it's all about those people that you surround yourself with, and the more information they can have, the better they're going to be in helping support you.
A lot of dealers that we work with, they make a lot of applications for growers, right? A lot of custom applications of spraying, anhydrous, you name it. And it's always been something that several of the farmers I talk to, we've been excited about, is one day, like when the guy pulls into your field to spray, it just pops up on your Climate field view that he's spraying it. Pops up that he's applying the anhydrous and how much and the rate. Basically, working with your retail partner to farm together almost and be like, hey, that looks great or whatever, So.
Right. Well, and I think the other challenge as a farmer myself, I've faced this and farming with my father-in-law and brother-in-law who aren't as concerned about the quality of my yield data as I am. It gets frustrating when you maybe need to stop and fix something because your yield monitor quits working. The combine's still working fine, but the yield monitor's not collecting data. And do you get to the point where your data is important enough to you that, maybe you're down for a day because you need to fix your yield monitor. Because when you've got holes in that data, you're missing something there, and taking the time to, make sure you're mapping, when you plant, and some of the challenges we have on the data side, if you put in DK 6606 and I put in DKC 6606, and you put in DKC 66-06, and somebody else puts in, capital letters, small case letters, you can create 50 different products out of the same hybrid, and pooling all that together, and for the computer to be smart enough to know when you made a mistake, when you entered the hybrid name, is a challenge. And we have that challenge on the research side of working with data. And do you lump all that stuff together and just assume that we knew what you meant? Or do you keep it separate and then your data is fragmented and just all the hassles that go with that?
I should mention that too, because I've harped a lot around data quality and entering that stuff. So, we've also been figuring out ways that I think, folks will see vast improvements in that type of, usability and ease of use of being able to, and you can see product names as well as crop protection names. The field view team has been working on how do I make that a much easier experience if I want to take the time to enter that stuff in, that it's simple, easy, and straightforward.
Like some things like prompting, what I mean, as you start to type it, do you mean this? And click on something that's pre-manufactured. So it's always the same.
So I think you'll start to see a lot of those types of improvements coming in.
No, that's great.
It's a small thing, but it's very important.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for logging in with us here. I thought we might go a little long because Tom and I would get off on tangents and talk about lots of things, and we could still do that to stretch this out for you. But it's also okay to end early. People tell me that frequently, that I don't have to talk all day. You can end early. So if there's nothing else coming in on the chat, Adam, any last comments from our studio audience today? While we've still got Tom here in a semi-captive situation.
I think we've got all the main points we wanted to hit taken care of. We'll be back on the 6th of April.
6th of April. Okay. Well, we might be planting by the 6th of April. I don't know. It's a little wet this week, but it seems like around my place, every time it dries out for a couple days, the sun comes out, it's still drying off fairly quickly after those rain events. So spring's right around the corner. Tom, any last comments you'd like to make?
Oh, I just thanks for the invitation to all of you for a chance to have this discussion. It was a lot of fun. Invite me back sometime.
I know you. I love this conference room and the internet here, and I told you I'll come back for anytime you want. And we tried to get together a few weeks ago at AgTech, and that didn't work with your schedule. And when you said then I'll do this another time, I thought, okay, I got him. So thank you. And Tom is living proof that good guys can finish first. I mean, Hollywood good looks and a great dude. So much and I I'm sure the brothers at home, a little bit of that climate money getting back home and buying some ground or anything.
We're not going to touch that. I would just say though, in seriousness, as we wrap up, one, thanks for listening. Hope you take away some interesting tidbits. And two, I mean, I mentioned it several times, but there are people out there who can help you figure these spaces out. It can sometimes be a little bit unnerving or a little bit intimidating to just jump into these new tools and ask those questions. But no, you got folks like Lance and the whole team here. We've got lots of support staff here. So don't be afraid to pick up that phone and ask for some help. I mean, that's exactly what these digital tools are for. And, as you all enter into planting season, please be safe, take the time, make sure you know where everybody is. And, I wish everyone a fantastic Plant 23.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.